You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to episode 33 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
Yeah, still pretty good, Brendan.
Still pretty good. So last week we solicited our Twitter followers to help provide us with some hot topics or statements and common sentiments currently prevalent in the Flesh and Blood community. These are things such as Lightning Briar needs a ban or Errata or something like that. The current buy-in price of competitive play is just too high, etc. So we're going to take this episode to give our opinion on those topics. Anyway, all that and more. But first, Hayden, let's talk about your week in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I've had a good week in Flesh and Blood. I played another skirmish on the weekend. So I played 2 the weekend before. Played 1 more this weekend. This will be my last for the season. I think there's some more this weekend, but I'm taking the weekend off from playing any Flesh and Blood or going to any skirmishes at least. Was a blitz skirmish. Had to drive north the city to go and play, but it was fun. It was awesome. A store I'd never been to before. Actually, there's a lot of stores in my sort of local area, within Sydney where I live, that are starting to pop up and running Flesh and Blood events. There's probably doubled in size since sort of coming out of lockdown, to be honest, in terms of regular events. So over the past couple of months. So it's awesome to see, just going out and trying to support those stores as well as they run these skirmish events, and even been to a couple of armories last week as well. So yeah, played Blitz, played a Briar deck, basically just a Blitz version of Tarek Patel's Lightning Briar deck with a couple of changes. The equipment was probably where I put the most spice into it, so to speak, for the Kano matchup. Playing Spell Void 4 actually in that matchup, plus the Crown of Dichotomy, which was fun. I actually played 2 Kano, and my only 2 losses on the day was Kano, and I think round 1 and then the quarterfinals. So a bit unfortunate, but the deck list ended up in the hands of a friend taking it out, so that was awesome to see. And yeah, overall, other than that, just kind of bit back to testing this week, which has been nice. And yeah, how about yourself?
Yep, so stayed consistent with the testing, but have not had much time to play. Just been very busy with other kind of real life stuff over the past few weeks, so I haven't had time to play any skirmishes or anything like that. And unfortunately, I don't know if I will have time to play skirmish this season, but it's all good. You know, we've got exciting events on the horizon in 2022, so that's definitely what I'm looking forward to. Outside of that, there may be some larger events that are put on by my local community, which I might be able to make it out to, and people would come down from Oklahoma and kind of like all the places around. Those are always really fun to go to, so sort of looking forward to that at this point.
Yeah, and just testing Flesh and Blood this week, or?
So I found a new game. It's called, it's definitely a side game. It's called Skytear. Team Covenant supports it and streams it. It's like a sort of board game MOBA card game, which is like a word sandwich right there, but it's really, really fun. It's probably one of my favorite games so far. And yeah, I've been playing that. It's really cool playing with this guy named Tim Bunn. He's actually the current world champion of the game, so definitely been thrown in the deep end. And then other than that, I've just been racking my brain with all sorts of NFT and crypto and all that kind of stuff, because I can't stop from just going deeper and deeper. It's just gets crazy,
Exactly.
For sure. Anyway, Hayden, let's talk about the news.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty light news day. So just a couple of things, then we'll talk about some of the videos we put up this week. But there's I thought a really cool thing that LSS have announced for kind of the festive period over December is that there's a festive armory kit. So I don't know if you've seen this, Brendan. I had the tab up before and it closed on me. But there's cold foil cracked baubles. So, but they're in a Christmas theme, right? So they've got a bit of holly and decoration on them. And I think it says the text is just wishing you a successful festive season or something like that. So they're really cool. I think they all come in cold foil. I think there's 36 per pack. So presumably if you're rocking up to an armory each week, you're going to get at least one of these. And there's 2 playmats as well. I think the playmats actually look awesome, to be honest. So I think 2 playmats per kit. So yeah, I thought it was just quite a cool, fun thing, a bit of a deviation from the usual kind of hero stuff with the weapons and now the rainbow foil heroes. It was just something a bit different, and I thought, yeah, quite a nice, I guess, also a piece of collector's or a collector's item, but also just something really cool to get back to the community as well. And there's quite a few of them in the pack, right, in the sort of armory kits.
Yeah, they're definitely very fun. and they're accessible enough. So I think most people will be able to get them. At least the cards, maybe not the mat, but I mean, Flesh and Blood is a game of very many playmats at this point.
It's true. Otherwise, we had some more nationals over the past weekend. We had Taiwanese nationals, which in the end was taken out by Limbo playing Briar. I didn't see too much. I know there was a bit of coverage, like text coverage, and then LSS put up an article covering the event and had some images and just a bit of a recap of the weekend, which was cool to see. I like that LSS are kind of putting up recaps of what's happening through these nationals, so we get a bit of a snapshot of like the meta, some of the players. Because some of these players we saw like Taiwanese nationals last year, and we saw some of their skirmish seasons and things like that. So we get to get familiar with some of them. And of course, I got a big shout out to Reiner making top 4. Yang Zhao Zhang played Reiner and took a top 4, I think, in the end, just losing a tight match to Briar. So yeah, it was really cool to see.
That's pretty cool. I think it's interesting to see how the meta develops in some of those regions, right? Because they tend to operate a bit more independently.
Yeah, I think so. I think they do currently because some of those regions, and we've talked about this before on Time Around and even in the main pod, that some of those regions just have less, less connection to some other parts of the world. So maybe something like Singapore and Hong Kong have had a bit more interaction with like the skirmish season, the online skirmish season, but even them still, like they kind of have their own meta. But Taiwan, like very siloed at this point, but that'll change, I think, once we get into next season. And we've actually got a great question in the Commander Cookout section this week on sort of competitive play in the OP season for next year.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and then, otherwise, just wanted to say that we should put, speaking of Rhino versus Briar, we put up a gameplay video this week of Hybrid Briar versus Rhino. Very interesting match. It's a matchup that probably the Rhino versus Lightning Briar matchup is a matchup that I've played a bit at this point. But this is a hybrid version, so it's a bit different. It was a very interesting game. There was a few cool turns in there. So yeah, you should go on YouTube.
Yeah, it's a very skillful match on my end. I do have to say, but I'll let you all the listeners find out the result.
And we also put up a few sort of deck profile and deck overview videos last week. So Brendan had a deck profile video that went up on Lightning Briar, as well as you can find the deck guide for that and the full sideboard breakdown on our Patreon. Brendan actually did something a bit different on the Patreon as well, where he did a video showcasing sort of the matchup guide for that, but there's also the written sideboard plan as always in terms of what comes in, what goes in, and then also as well that Briar hybrid deck that has won 3 nationals at this point. Brendan also sort of covered a bit of a top level of what that deck's trying to do in a pretty quick sort of 10-minute video last week. So if you are looking for some information about that deck that's played in the gameplay, go check it out. I think it's an interesting deck list and doing something a little bit different to what we've been seeing from the Briars so far this season.
Yeah. So last week's Time Around was with Dante. Dante, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the name before if you listen to this podcast. But a 2-time national calling whatever, not national, but 2-time calling top 8er, 1-time national top 8er, and all around just good guy. Joins us on Time Around. It's a pretty funny one. There's some funny stories about Dante and some funny stories about his time living in Texas. So next week's Time Around is actually with Stephen Woolley from Team Covenant, and I really recommend checking that one out when it goes up in the next few days. It was a great conversation. Always is with Steven. Awesome guy.
Your arch nemesis.
Yeah, arch nemesis and favorite human being alive. I just want to do a Patreon call out to our over 300 patrons. Just awesome to see all the support. The Arsenal Pass Patreon does have tons of extra content. It's got an extra podcast, live session, which we did recently on game plans, as well as, if we put up a deck tech on Arsenal Pass, it'll usually be accompanied by a full written sideboard guide, deck theory, spreadsheets, math, ratios, all that kind of stuff on the Arsenal Pass Patreon. Everything you need to pick it up and start being competitive. But anyway, Hayden, time to fire up the grill. You said we got a spicy Commander Cookout this week.
Oh, I mean, that's not that spicy. I think it's just really interesting and ties into what we just talked about with some of the metas in different parts of the world. And this is a question that actually was part of, so during the week for the main topic of the pod, as I said, or as Brendan said, sorry, I did throw out a bit of a question to some of our followers, which was, what are some of the hot topics and sentiments that are currently floating around the Fab community? And I've seen a lot of these, but it was also good just to get these reiterated. I don't want to be looking through my lens. But as part of that, some people also shot through some things that were a bit more of a question sort of format, I think. And a couple of these I thought were really good, and I've just chosen one that I thought we could talk about in Commander Cookout today. And this comes from Druid. who says, what do you hope to realistically see in terms of OP for 2022? Number of callings by region, how many PTs you think can happen with COVID, and if they should start having pro quests locally or keeping them as calling side events. So I thought I'd jump into this first, Brendan, and let you mull over it, because I've been thinking about this actually after I saw this question. In terms of OP for 2022, like the main, I guess, I think it's a key part of what, I guess, the success of Flesh and Blood in 2022. Like, this is kind of the marquee year, right? This is the OP program that's been touted, and this is, now we're going to see it realized. So I think, first of all, the Worlds is like the pinnacle, right? World Championships sounds like it's going to happen around November of 2022. I think that is one of the most important things that has to happen. I think 3 PTs is probably the number that I would like to see, and I think that's probably somewhat realistic with COVID. 2 might be more realistic in terms of maybe 1 early year, 1 sort of like mid to late year, and then you roll into Worlds in November. Might be more realistic, gives people time, gives countries time to start to open up. But in the past few weeks, you've seen there's been a bit of a mixed bag of what's happened around, I guess, like Asia Pacific, and North America is really starting to open up for like travel and tourism and things like that, but maybe less so in Europe. So I think 2 is probably realistic, and maybe that starts sort of like April, May, around post Easter sort of time. That would be my sort of what I would like to see in terms of like callings by region. I still think that we need those regional callings, especially in this kind of time that we're in, where it is more difficult maybe to travel continental. So I think ideally what I would like to see is, I think the US again needs to have the largest number of callings. I think that's just where the largest player base is right now. So I think I don't know if we need 5 weeks, 4 callings. I don't know if that, or 6 weeks, 4 callings. I don't think that is necessary. But if we break it down quarterly, I'd love to see maybe 2 or 3 callings a quarter in a market like the US. I think is going to be really beneficial as those seasons come out, because obviously we get new sets and whatnot. And then probably from Europe, I think like 1 a quarter would be great. So you're looking at 4 there. And then in Asia Pacific, I think similar, like maybe 1 to 2 a quarter. There's a pretty big player base in Asia Pacific, right, with New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. And it is becoming a lot easier to travel in the area. And it's only about, like 8 hours you can be anywhere within Asia Pacific mostly. So I think you could realistically have 1 to 2 per quarter, depending on the quarter, maybe 6 total for the year. So it's upwards of 20, 25 callings for the year is probably what I would love to see. In terms of ProQuest, just want to touch on that as well, because I think that's a great shout out from Drew there. In terms of ProQuest, I think we do need to start seeing those locally. There's a lot of PTIs floating around with these callings that have backed up over the past sort of few months, and of course, like with Nationals top 8's also rewarding, giving you PTIs. So you could assume that the first Pro Tour, maybe the second Pro Tour, they can be pretty big events, right? Some people might hold these for Worlds, but I think we do need to start seeing ProQuest start to increase. So I know we've had a couple locally, like in Melbourne, Australia, when their calling got cancelled, they had a ProQuest still, which was really great for the local community there. I think we need to see, probably regionally, so say within like a country, the US probably needs like, probably over maybe a dozen per quarter. And something like Australia and New Zealand, maybe it's 1 or 2 per quarter leading into those Pro Tours. So I think we do need to start seeing them locally. It's just up to LSS in terms of like managing the amount of invites that they're giving out based on the number of actual Pro Tours that we're going to have this year. You can't keep banking these PTIs and then not really having anything for it to go forward to, because that means when we get to these first few events, we can have like 500 plus player events pretty easily. That's my monologue, Brendan. Went longer than I thought.
Yeah, so for brevity, I'm just going to echo what Hayden said, and I'm going to expand on it a little bit. For callings, especially regional callings, I hope that they're clustered, right? So I hope that they do, callings in Europe, they kind of cluster them together in like a month. Same thing with Asia Pacific, like they did in the US. I really, really hope they do that, because it makes traveling just so much more reasonable for people that are not living in that region. So I really hope for that. The PTs, yeah, I do think they need, or the ProQuest qualifiers, do think they need to be local. The current setup for them is okay, though, where you just do it if you don't make day 2. And then, of course, I'm just hoping for at least 2 PTs. And I think Worlds definitely needs to happen in 2022.
Yeah. Interesting. So I think we have very different opinions on the calling, right? I think the callings need to not be grouped because... So I get it for a player like yourself who wants to travel and wants to have incentive to maybe go to, the UK, play an event, go to the Netherlands, play an event, go to Germany, play an event, 3 weeks home, right? But if those 3 events happen and then there's nothing for 3 months in the European market, that's a real downside for that community. There's less things for them to look forward to. I think it's not as good for stores who are trying to, like push events and then lead up to that. I think in general, although it's better for, I guess, pro level play or aspiring pro players, I think it's worse for the communities themselves. So I think it's LSS's responsibility to really balance that. I think one of the ways you can do that is say there's a pro tour in the UK middle of next year. I think they could put one either side, and that's a good incentive for someone like yourself or for whoever it might be. But I also think that, if you don't have 4 or 5 months running, that you don't have a calling event in a region that's pretty significant and really growing, that's really going to stunt your growth. So I think I see the point, but also I think there's the responsibility to find a balancing act between those.
Sure. I'm just definitely not going to be flying 20 hours for a calling. And I know you did it, Hayden, but obviously it's not sustainable in like 2022, especially as we head into like the Pro Touring world. So we'll have to see, how they schedule it. Definitely is going to determine, I think, traveling for a lot of us that plan on traveling for these things.
For sure, but I mean, I look at other games and I hate to always throw back to Magic, but Magic had a very good pro circuit and a very good Grand Prix, calling equivalent circuit, and there were very few players who would play, majority of the calling level events in a year, because they're big open events, right? Although, as the best players, you might expect to do well on them. It's not a guarantee, and the return rate on those is a lot lower than, say, a Pro Tour, for example. So a lot of the high level players, maybe pro players, the club pro players, they would go and play maybe the GPs, the callings either side. But they probably wouldn't travel out of region very much unless they were going to go and spend time there, or they lived in a region that didn't have those events. So, not North American players, not European players, for instance.
Great.
Yeah.
So with that, let's head into the main talk of the pod.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you do have a question to submit for the Commander Cookout, great question. Thank you, Jared. You can either drop us a line on Twitter, add us on Twitter, put it in the YouTube comments below, or flick us an email if you want to go old school. I love that it's old school now. No snail mail, sorry, but arsenalpassfab@gmail.com if you want to get in any questions for the Commander Cookout, and we'll get them on the show. All right, Brendan, moving to the main topic. So, yeah, only 2 days ago, so thank you to everyone who responded to this, but I put a question out on Twitter just asking, what are the general kind of sentiments or statements or hot topics that people are seeing repeatedly come up in sort of flesh and blood discourse and within the community right now, whether that be within local communities, whether that be within online communities, fan pages, Discord, etc. What are the things that people are repeatedly seeing pop up? These things that are just people need answers to, people want to know, or people have issues with. And we generally, on the main podcast, we talk about, specific flesh and blood play topics, right? So whether it be like level ups, whether it be metagame, whether it be, whatever it is. But I think these kind of community-based hot topics are really important. I mean, Brendan talked about this week and said that, now is a really good time. We've kind of got a bit of a cleaner schedule, I guess, in terms of what we're talking about at the moment. And there's a few really hot topics right now as we sort of end national season and we come into sort of the off season, I guess, before Everfest comes out. So, Brendan, the way this is going to work is I am going to read a statement. This is a statement from the community, hot topic, whatever it might be, a sentiment. And we're each going to give whether we strongly agree, we're neutral on the statement, or we disagree, or we strongly disagree on it. And then we're going to have a bit of a back and forth. We're going to discuss. I'm sure some of these we will completely agree on, some of them we will completely disagree on. But either way, I'm sure there's going to be some interesting things that come out of it. And we're going to give, I guess, our view on these topics and where we stand. Whether, I've definitely had people, and I know you have, Brendan, as well, message and ask about some of these topics and ask us what our opinion is. Some people might not want to know our opinion on it, but we're going to give it anyway. So, sound good?
Yeah, I'm really growing as a YouTuber, just reacting to other people's opinions. I like it.
Well, I think it's important that
you don't have to justify yourself. Let's just get into it.
All right. Okay, so I want to start with, I've kind of grouped these a little bit roughly, but also I kind of just threw these together because we've had some come through late as well. But some of these are, I guess, based on the current class constructor format and sort of current formats to start with. So the first statement is, Brendan, the current classic constructed format is imbalanced. Where do you stand on that?
Depends what balanced means. Is it more balanced than other formats have been in Flesh and Blood? If we talk about class construction, other eras.
You take it however you want. You take it however you want.
Well, this is part of how I want it. So yes, for sure. Briar is not chain, and some people think that it is chain, and it's not. It's not even close. And is it imbalanced? I mean, it depends, right? Like it depends who you qualify as imbalanced. But yeah, if you look at like, I don't know, UK nationals or you look at US nationals, yeah, it was probably a sort of imbalanced format. In the sense that Briar just dominated most things, and was highly represented as well. But I mean, if you look at the Calling Orlando that happened the same week, and Oldhim won that. And as we progress farther into national season, you look at Briar losing more and more, and other decks that were actually kind of conceptually designed by Legend Story Studios to counter this sort of hero and strategy, like the Ice Lexi, like the Oldhim, like the Viscerai, which is a really tough match, by the way, which people don't get a lot of credit for. I think that the format can rebalance if people are willing to play other decks that are better into Lightning Briar. Like if you just keep playing the mirror and we keep playing decks that are bad into Lightning Briar that struggle, then yeah, we'll probably perpetuate this dominance that the deck is seeing. But if there's an adaptation in the meta, then I think that kind of tic-tac-toe, rock paper scissors, whatever you want to call it, as Lightning Briar will start to fade out a little bit because it's getting beat up on decks that are targeting it, other decks will have time to come back in.
So if I say what the definition of balanced is, right? So that's a rough start because you, like you say, it depends what you mean by balance. I think being balanced, right? If you take the actual just definition of what balance means, is to have different elements in the correct proportions, right? Which I think actually applies really well to a game like Flesh and Blood, having different elements in the correct proportions. And I don't just mean elements in terms of Tales variant, but works. One of the main things, right, is having the ability to play different things, to be able to do different things in the format. And I think to your point, with Chain, that was very difficult. With Lightning Briar, I think that's less difficult, but still constrained. But any meta should have some constraints to it because decks should perform well. And then the decks that you, I guess, need to play, or the heroes that you need to explore, or the strategies you need to explore to beat those, they're not endless, right? There's going to be certain things that are going to be, a lot better than others. And those are the ones that should be the ones that get played and should be the ones that get seen. So I think there's definitely those strategies in this format available to people. We've talked about some of these heroes, talk about some of these strategies. I do think that there's some constraints on it, and I think we'll go into that with another statement we've got further down, just around card pool for a hero like Briar. But I would say if I was going to put where I kind of stand or sit on this right now, I would say I would be in the disagree camp. Between the disagree and neutral, probably disagree. I would say.
Yeah, disagree for me.
Not strongly, just disagree.
I mean, it depends, right? Like, it's all the same to me. I just disagree. I just don't think we're at that point, but maybe the meta will actually never evolve to reach its full realization, which probably most Flesh and Blood metas don't, right? They kind of pause somewhere before, they actually are totally figured out. So it may, Tales of Aria might go down in history. It was just like Lightning Briar was busted because we had a series of competitive events very clustered together. Lightning Briar dominated, and then we didn't have events. So we didn't really have a chance to respond. This is in the context of we did have, last week and the weekend before, we saw some nice innovation in the meta. We saw Ice Lexi win Canadian Nationals. We saw Hybrid Briar win some other Nationals. We saw changes in the meta. But after that, after Nationals, there's not a lot of reasons to really keep innovating and keep trying to, create decks that prey on Lightning Briar. That being said, depending on when they announce New Zealand Nationals and Australian Nationals, that's going to be my final sort of litmus test to be like, was this format truly, Briar's format truly unbalanced, and everything beat it? Because there will be tons of time to innovate and prey on this deck before those nationals happen.
Yeah. Okay. The next statement, which ties really closely into this, then if people, I guess if the belief is that there's a bit of imbalance, is the format is incapable of rebalancing itself, of rebalancing itself.
Yeah. So it is capable or it is incapable?
It is incapable.
It is incapable. Well, I think no. So I think already we're seeing kind of rebalancing the format, right? The format was started out being, let's just go back to like day one of Tales. It was pretty heavy Prism and Bravo and all these heroes that did really well in Monarch and got a bunch of upgrades. And then we saw Briar commit, rebalance in, put Prism in its place, back on the bench. Just kidding. But there's a cyclical motion. So we've seen the dominance of Lightning Briar, and I think as Oldhim becomes more prevalent, and really I can't stress it enough, this Viscerai deck becomes more prevalent, and Ice Lexi as well does have a lot of game against it. We'll see other decks come into the meta and the rebalancing again.
Yeah. So you sit on the disagree, strongly disagree?
I definitely disagree about the incapable.
Okay, so I don't disagree. Yeah, I think I sit on disagree as well. I don't think I think there's some aspects to this that are somewhat true, but it's not because of the card pool or the game itself. I actually think it's because of the way that we approach deck building as a collective community right now, and just where the game is at its cycle and age. And I talk about this on Time in the Round this week with Stephen that we just recorded yesterday. Actually, Stephen asked a great question about Lightning Briar. So I'm not going to rehash it because if you want to see that, you can check out Time in the Round this week. But basically, I think it comes down more to just where the life cycle of Flesh and Blood is right now, more so than the card pool. So I would say disagree. But yeah, it's for those reasons. Let's move on. This is a very hot topic right now, I think, Brennan, and there's a lot of calls for this and a lot of people talking about this in different ways. And we're going to talk about some of the different ways that people are approaching this. But we need bannings in Classic Constructed.
We always need bannings in something. If the mob had its way, the mob always wants blood. Every time a new card comes out or Legend Story Studio sneezes, somebody wants something banned. So this is, yes, definitely a hot topic. And I think we all know it's at the top of that totem pole for a lot of people. It's like, okay, ban Briar or something. And it's like, okay, we'll meet you halfway. Let's just errata her so it's like elemental cards or something. And I had this conversation with Steven as well, but we'll go ahead and rehash it because I'm going to say this over and over again. It's like, if you really want blood, if you really want something banned and you just need that to bring you happiness, let's talk about Plunder Run because that's the card for me. Rosetta is great. Lightning or Briar is great, but like Plunder Run is our offender in my opinion.
Yep. I mean, I don't disagree. I mean, so we need bannings in Classic Constructed. Where do you stand on it currently, Brennan?
So I just feel uncomfortable. This is one of the questions where I actually feel like I don't know enough, and I feel like I kind of play the game a lot, but I still feel like I just don't like. I'm just not well versed enough to be like, yes, this needs to be banned. I just don't think there's been enough time, and I just, in a sense, I don't feel qualified, which is kind of surprising. So I would say if we have to do it,
you have to. You can't squeeze out of this one.
No, I'm saying if we have to ban something, I'm looking at Plunder Run.
Oh.
But I would err on the side of no bans.
Okay, so you're somewhere between neutral and disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, I sit on neutral. I think I definitely sat on the side of disagree. Probably 2 weeks ago, Plunder Run is the card for me that has continued to be a bit of an issue. Kind of throughout the game, to be honest, and there's some like asymmetry with that, with how that interacts with Runeblade, which is probably really starting to tip it over the edge for me. I think in decks like Katsu and other aggressive decks, Plunder Run is a reasonable tool, but is also still very, very good. But yeah, Runeblade is maybe what's happening there for me. All right, this ties in again. Next statement, Brennan. Brian needs an errata.
So the same discussion, right? This is sort of the middle ground. It's like, okay, if we don't ban her, we're going to errata her. And the idea is that you errata Briar so that the effects, the embodiment of lighting, embodiment for if they trigger off, what is it? Element cards?
Yeah.
Is that the correct word?
Yeah,
so
it would be
cards.
lightning or earth or elemental cards, yeah.
I would argue that this is a pretty simple idea, and that not that it's wrong, but that it's so simple that this was probably explored in development. And I would assume, if you look at the congruency of the other heroes, that it was pretty possible that Briar was actually designed like this at one point, and then they decided to change that to generic to buffer because it wasn't good enough. Not saying this is not the correct direction to go, but it's interesting. I'm not sure if that's it. In that, this is the by the way, for context, this is actually the most drastic response, right? Like, people want to pretend like this is middle ground because it's not a ban, but an errata is the worst thing you can possibly do for the game. So I'm going to be a strong disagree just because erratas are terrible, and that could be a pretty crippling one at that. And is it needed? Maybe not. So there's a lot of things that go wrong with me for that statement, but strong disagree because erratas are just very bad.
Damn it! I thought we were going to have a bit of a disagreement on that one, but I sit firmly in the strongly disagree on this one. I think errataing is one of the worst things you can do in a physical card game, outside of like wholesale changes for I guess like keywords and things like that, in terms of how those are phrased, so slight turns of phrase. But actually changing the wording on a card to play completely differently is a completely different thing. So strongly disagree. I think that digital card games, they have this available to them, right? That's one of the strengths of digital card games. I think cardboard paper games do not have this available to them. I think it is a very bad thing that can happen and would not be good for the long term health of the game. I think the other systems in place that can be used, bannings, Living Legend is much more appropriate. So okay, we said the same there. Next statement: we need a balance to the game system that isn't bannings. So erratas would be one of those limits, so card limits, rather than just straight bannings. You know, you can only have one of X card in your deck or two of X card. Rule changes. So could LSS explore rule changes? Is one of these things that I've seen floated around. There's a few different things that people are floating around in terms of just other than Living Legend. And I guess, well, Living Legend is one we already have, but other than bannings, we need a balance to the game system.
Yeah, so all of those sound very clunky to me upon like first hearing them. I mean, it depends what the rules changes are, right? But you know, if we're talking about like card limitations and stuff like that, like it does get pretty clunky for a new player to like pick up the game, start building a deck, and they get to their locals. It's like, oh, by the way, you can only have 5.5 plunder runs in your deck. And you're like, what? You know, something like that. So I'm gonna be pretty neutral on this one, just because like I don't know, and it also just it kind of sounds bad, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think I'd probably sit around the neutral camp to maybe slightly disagree. I think there's some things that could be explored that have been looked at in other game systems. And it's probably, to be honest, I think, again, erratas I don't think are an option. I think that's a dangerous path to walk down. I think limits I'm not excited about. I know that's used in maybe in eternal formats in Magic, for instance. I think it's a bit confusing and a bit soupy. Not a big fan of that. Some of the, I guess, rule changes that could be explored, maybe, but again, like those sort of things could change the fundamentals of the game, and I don't think that's where LSS should go. In reality, where I think that we need to look, and LSS need to look, is actually just a fundamental design of classes. To be honest, that's if I was to say where the balancing needs to come from. But that's nothing that we can do about the current format. That's a future thing and a future-proofing thing that I think would be good for LSS to look at. Is just to do some retrospective on their design process. I'm sure they have post Chain and Dustblade, so I expect to actually see that get better. But it's not an easy job. The card pool only continues to grow. The hero pool only continues to grow. So more and more complexities will come up for them, and they'll have more challenges. So interesting to see what happens next. Right, moving past, I guess, formats. Actually, there was one further down, which I want to link in with these formats, and then we're going to move through past kind of, gameplay formats. This is my favorite. Blitz is a broken format.
Blitz is not a broken format. Blitz is actually a good format, and you can tie me up or do whatever you want because I said that, but it genuinely is a very good format, and especially for the game, right? Especially for new players, it's very approachable. You don't have to think about sideboards. You still have a lot of creativity with your armor, and then the games are very digestible, and you can still learn Flesh and Blood very, very well and become an extremely good player by playing Blitz, and that can translate, very, what would the word be? I want to say correlates, but it translates really well to Classic Constructed as well. If you're a really good Blitz player, you're generally a really good Classic Constructed player as well, unless you're like cheesing with something, I guess. So Blitz is absolutely not a bad format in my opinion. It's like a strong disagree, and I'm not partial to Blitz. I don't like a particular strategy in Blitz that I just like to own people with or something like that. I'm not like a dirty Ira player. I know I like to play Kano because it's fun, but I would do that in CC if it was viable. It's a good format. It's great, and I think it's fantastic for the game. If they were having Blitz Pro Tours and Blitz Callings, then okay, we can sit down and we can have a word. But just in general, no, it's a good format.
Okay, so it's not broken in Europe. You strongly disagree with that statement. Sounds like.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. We can finally disagree with something. I would say I'm kind of neutral on this, to be honest, to maybe slightly agree. And I agree. I don't think it's a bad format, but I do think it's, if you use the word, when people say broken, I assume they mean imbalanced. There's things that are happening in that format that is, could be corrected to make the format better, more playable. And I agree to an extent. I think Duskblade, to be honest, is an issue in that format. It limits a lot of strategies that people can employ. I do agree that I think the format is a great entry point to the game. I kind of somewhat agree with you that that it translates well into skills for Classic Constructed. Although I think that really depends on the Classic Constructed format that you're playing at the time. I think is my caveat to that. I think limited, like especially draft, is a better way to do that. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of some of the things that are happening currently in the format, I think it's. I think I've never had a problem with Ira. I do have maybe some issues with like what we're going to see in the future of the format, just because I think it's hard to balance this format. So in that way, I think that it can be a broken format. But I don't want to see Blitz go anywhere. I definitely don't want to see though Blitz, like high level Blitz events, so callings, pro events, etc. I think that's not going to be a good time, and we will see how broken that format can be if that happens.
It's funny. I have a follow-up question. Do you what's higher variance? A Tales of Aria sealed pro event or a Blitz pro event? And this regardless of draft and top 8.
Oh, it's definitely sealed, but it's not the variance isn't my issue with the Blitz
What's
format.
more balanced? What's more balanced?
Oh, sealed.
I don't know.
100%. See, a balance in terms of like the elements being there in the right quantities and being fairly even. It's sealed. Yeah, there's variance to it. I don't disagree. The Blitz format has, I would say, this variance, but like some of the balancing issues in Blitz, I think are really. If the skirmish format was as prevalent and as important for players as it was in season 1, I think we'd see just how broken to an extent some things are in Blitz right now.
Name them. I gotta go slightly deeper in here.
Dustblade. I talked about that, but like
I haven't played with it.
The Briar deck that we played last weekend was just it felt so oppressive. Honestly, it's like I don't know what the bad matchup was, and maybe in 2 weeks' time I have a different opinion, and someone can prove me wrong. But the Briar deck that we played, I think if people have issues with it in Classic Constructed, play that deck in Blitz.
And it's the core issue is Dustblade.
It just means that strategies where you could be looking at maybe something with old time to be, I guess, more defensive, or you look to control into the mid game with Dustblade, you just kind of have this inevitability because there's only 40 cards, right? So I guess fatiguing is like somewhat of a thing, although of course you're on half-life, so that is relevant. But you have the same amount of value out of your equipment, which is really important. So the value of the equipment doesn't diminish. So yeah, the Dustblade just gives like pure inevitability, to be honest.
And that list was really good in Akano with the Spell Void 4.
It was better than I thought it would be. I think
but that should be the equalizer, right? Like if there's this very heavy, well, no, I mean, if there's a very heavy aggro, I don't know, there could be other decks, right? But like Kano's kind of built to do this. There's a heavy aggro red line deck that cannot play Arcane Barrier. Like Kano should be the deck that keeps it in check, right? That kind of stops it from being oppressive.
Yeah.
So is that possible? Because I haven't played the deck, right? I haven't played with the Dustblade or this Lightning Bird deck in Blitz. But I think from a theory standpoint, Kano could keep it back.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to say. I think I need to play more games of the deck. The sample size we had was like only 10 games, and I think it was like, I lost 2 of those. I think all the rest won. And I definitely got hit by some variance in those games, like drawing a all attack action hand that had no go again, etc. Like
all good. I won't drill you too much on it. I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper.
I'll give you the top line. The top line is that you have Spell Void 4, and the game probably lasts 2 turns. So there needs to be some high rolling on, I think, or some very good draws, I think, on the Kano side if they're going second to win that match. Unfortunately.
Interesting.
Anyway, we can move on. So yeah, that's kind of the, I guess, format based questions. The cost of entry to the game is high, and players have to front up $1,000 plus to be competitive immediately.
This is a hilariously deep question. So I recently listened to a podcast by Team Covenant called "Are Investors Good for Games?" And I think that hour-and-a-half long podcast would scratch the surface of answering this question. The base question is too expensive. Yeah, it is. It's expensive, and it's not great. If you're here to play the game, you don't want to be limited by money, right? It's not great. But you know what else sucks? Is having your cards being not worth anything. So you're probably going to come back and be like, there's a middle ground. There probably is, right? But it is nice. There are players that just play this game to kind of break even, and like the idea that they can go to sealed and stuff and open up that that Rampart of the Ram's Head or Legendary, the Corsham, and sell it, and then have like positive EV on the last 4 weeks is just like that's awesome to them. And the idea of like cards appreciating is really good, but all this kind of has like the other side of the coin, which is we tend to have some higher prices, and it's a bit of a pain point right now because some cards have yet to be reprinted, which I'm very confident are going to be reprinted. Things like Enlightened Strike, Command and Conquer, And I think that reprinting those cards should help with the price a lot. But initial answer is yes, it's too high, but it's, I don't know. We're playing it like we're on thin ice, right? If it goes too cheap, then it can also lead to a bad scenario.
Yeah. Okay. So you sit on the agree, maybe
Neutral.
neutral to slightly agree.
It's agree. I don't think that anybody should have to pay $1,000 to like play a game for fun. But by the way, you said the word competitively, which is interesting. We have to break down that word, right? You don't have to pay $1,000 to be competitive at your armory event. If you think that, you're wrong. And like, period. And I will hardcore that. Like, that is where I stand. Maybe there's an argument that you need these cards to be competitive at like a pro level event, but that's a different conversation. But I remember back in Welcome to Wraith, it was a big pain point is that people would think that they couldn't play armories without legendaries. That is false. There's plenty of other options, and it's an armory, it's casual, and there's usually when there's a disparity and people think that they can't play an armory because of a piece of equipment, they still have a lot to learn, and so I don't think it's the equipment that's limiting them. So I don't know. That it's a tough conversation, but it's deep.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and keep it pretty surface level. I disagree. I think in terms of that statement, that the cost of entry to the game is too high. And the big reason for me is that we have, and people can, I guess, argue on this itself, but I think we have a fantastic limited side of Flesh and Blood. It may not be as great as, say, Magic has with the consistency of its formats, and that's, I guess, proven by Tales of Aria Sealed, but I don't think that format is atrocious. I think that format's fine. It's not amazing. The draft format, on the other hand, I think is fantastic. But anyway, I digress. There's a limited format there that anyone can play. It's accessible to players. I also think that Blitz is pretty accessible as well. We talked about that format before. What do you think of that format? That format is there. It's an armory format. It's accessible. And also, I think in terms of competitive play, you can look at other card games and go, well, if I want to say, I'm going to take Magic, for example, because it's an easy one, because it's one that's been, had a standard format, a rotating format for a long time. And the keyword there is a rotating format, right? So you have this rotating format where every 3 months, my deck it's like 6 months, right? Every 6 months, maybe I cannot play this deck anymore for whatever reason, or at least every 18 months, I'm going to need to change my deck because, the cards I had in the deck 18 months ago have almost completely rotated out now. And that might be less expensive, right? That might be like $300, $400, $500 once you factor in lands and whatever. And Flesh and Blood's a bit different, right? You have the equipment, and that's often the biggest outlay is your equipment pieces, so legendary equipments. But those equipment are going to hang around. Those equipment are going to hold at least some value. They're going to be around for a reasonable amount of time. So in terms of like cost of entry to get into it, I'd say the upfront cost is like slightly higher than other games, but it doesn't need to be, to Brendan's point, right? That you can slowly get into it, right? You don't need the skull cap straight away, play the Ironrot Helm or whatever, the Hope Mitch's Hood or whatever. Like it's not going to take away from being able to go to, I guess, events, armory events and play competitively, or you do well, especially if you're learning, right? Like if you want to go ahead and go straight to your first calling and your target is top 64, top 32, well, there's probably a different discussion to have there around like why you're playing the game, and is the outlay of cost actually that relevant to you if that's your goal. So there's a few different things playing into it there, I think, but on the whole, I think it's just, especially like you said, you could go into that podcast that Team Covenant did, because the whole idea of like cards having value, I think, is important to a game. If your cards have no value, why are you opening product, right? How does the game survive?
So it's a funny question because it's just it's so deep. But like my basic answer, which is a ridiculous thing, is like if everything else stayed the same, but you had the option of paying $0 to play this game, that'd be great. I would love to live in that utopia of a world, which I know is not the statement here. The statement is like, it's not 1,000, so it should be 200 or it should be 500, which is kind of relative, right? But yeah, I wish that people weren't limited by some sort of financial barrier to play the game. That sucks. Period. But it comes with a lot of other baggage.
Yeah. I think I'm just gonna leave that one. I think my end of the day, I would say that I disagree. I wouldn't say I strongly disagree, because there's elements I think that are a bit of an issue with that. The reprints is one, the access to a card like Skullcap, E-Strike, and Command & Conquer. I do agree. I think those cards are too expensive, and while it's nice to have certain staples that are worth that your investment still continues to be worth money if you want to keep those cards and play with them for a while and then sell them or whatever. to try a different class, that's fine. But these are staples, so that argument doesn't even fit as well. But yeah, let's move on. There needs to be a rules enforcement level between professional and casual for skirmishes, road to nationals, and pro quests. I guess the sentiment coming out around this is that there's a big drop off between professional level events, right? So the etiquette and the expectation of play at a professional level event, like a calling, versus what the level of play expected at a skirmish is, comparatively to an armory. Because at the moment, a skirmish and armory are the same, and even the same with road to nationals and pro quests. So people are saying we need something in between in terms of like a rules enforcement level, effectively.
I don't know. I think that like you might be able to answer this better, having experience in like the Magic rule system. I don't. So right now I haven't noticed any issues, but then again, like my focus for the past few months has just been on the callings. So I've only kind of been experiencing that. What is the current issue with the disparity?
Yeah, so my understanding is that people have an issue of that if you're playing a road to nationals or a skirmish event, the expectation of to which standard players should be remembering their triggers, should be responsible for, I guess, playing, not being sloppy effectively, right? And I guess the thing as well is if you have newer players coming into the game, it's really murky in terms of what expectations are. Skirmish, I think so this is interesting. I think the skirmish side is a game day, effectively, if you've ever played Magic. It's a local level event. It should be somewhat casual. Yes, I get that there's prizes that are worth money, but that's not through the fault of LSS in terms of like the secondary market. While they do keep an eye on the secondary market, I think the prizes that are available, there's more and more skirmishes coming, right? So these foils are becoming, I guess, worth slightly less premium prices. But that skirmish event is designed to be a store-based event, a local level event. So I think having skirmishes at a casual level events the same as armories is perfectly fine and reasonable. That in between area before you get to like the full professional level of I guess play expectation and rules enforcement level with IPs and all that sort of level of rules, we don't really have anything in between now. And I guess that's what people are saying, and I actually agree. I think there needs to be something, because not even just for the fact that there's issues with like the rulings that are happening. I actually think it's an issue with like expectations for and on players in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing in these events. That is, as the game grows and as more players come in, there could be some recurring issues that come up. I think it's just worthwhile that LSS delineate this and make it really clear as to the expectations on rules and events that are somewhere between professional level event and a skirmish or an armory. I think a Road to Nationals is a great example of this. You're going to have local players. You're going to have players who it might be their second, third, fourth event playing this Road to Nationals. Are they expected to play at a professional level, or are they expected to play at a casual level? Like it feels like there should be something in between for these events that have significant prizes in the form of qualifying you for nationals and getting you to that pro level event. And I don't know what they call this. They call it, I don't know, semi-professional or amateur or whatever they want to call it. In Magic, they had a rules level enforcement for these events, and I think they worked really well.
Awesome. Well, I think I'll abstain from this one just because I'm a little underqualified, but I'll follow in. I'll echo what you say.
Well, there's only one level judge in this conversation. One level 1 judge is what I meant to say.
Oh yeah. You really need to getting that level 1 qualification.
Is the player base peaking? Oh, sorry, the player base is peaking and stagnating. We need ways to drive player growth.
And player base is peaking and stagnating. Yeah, interesting. So first of all, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll just give you some talking points on this as well once you decide on where you stand on it. But I guess if you do agree that we need to drive player growth, like what are the ways and how do you grow communities?
Well, I would always love to drive as much player growth as possible. But, in terms of stagnation and any of that stuff, well, we have this thing happening in 2022, which is the OP, which is going to be like the Pro Tour Worlds and putting up like $1 million. That sounds like a pretty good idea, or a pretty good idea to me to inject more interest and bring players into the game, as well as obviously streaming all those events and new sets. And I don't know, it seems fine to me, right? So is the player base actually stagnating?
I don't. Is this a question to me?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it actually is. It kind of seems like it's growing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably it depends how people are looking at this metric wise, right? Like, are people just looking at their local events and there's no new players coming in? Are they looking at maybe the Orlando calling as a number versus the Vegas calling? Like, there's so many ways that people could look at this, right? Are they looking at the number of people on the Facebook fan page and maybe that growth is declining? There's so many ways you could look at it, but the only real metric you could have, or they could even be looking at, maybe gem numbers in the 90-day XP. Like, there's so many ways that people could be trying to gauge this. But there's so many different facets of what's happening. You've got players who maybe just play this game casually. You've got, I guess, coming into winter, and there's still, like COVID impacts. There's so many things happening that it's really hard to say that the player base is stagnating. So I'm not going to comment on that at all because I don't know. But in terms of, I guess, like, I would strongly agree that we need ways to continue to grow the player base. And you've talked about one for, I guess, like professional level events for people aspiring to want to play competitively. I think we also need things for casual. I think we need ways to continue to drive the casual growth, because grassroots Flesh and Blood is going to be what continues to drive this game. It's going to be what the players who buy the product. You look at games in general. Like, I throw it out there, 90% of player bases are going to be somewhere between like casual to semi-competitive. They play in road to nationals, they play in skirmishes, etc. But it's only going to be maybe 10% of the player base that actually regularly attend callings, want to actively attend pro quests and win those and play pro tours. So there's a big obligation, I think, to continue to grow our communities. And I think there's been this sort of question about, like, how do you grow communities? And I think one of the ways, first of all, is like getting stores on board, right? So if you have stores in your local community that have maybe brought Flesh and Blood in to try, or kind of on the fence, then why not offer to help them run armory events? Go down with one or two of your friends. Maybe there's a couple of players at that local store that are interested. You help learn to play. Maybe run a learn to play event, which Alex is very supportive of, and we'll send IRO decks, etc. And then help them with their first few armories. That's definitely what I've seen in communities around the world, where people start those communities, they get involved. And then those communities grow because more and more players come in. They get to 6-7 players in their weekly events. The next thing you know, another few players have come in, or they've brought friends, or friends have come across from other games. So that's the way to continue to grow communities, is to continue to seed them, basically. And then just to continue to, I guess, have welcoming environments. And I think the game does a lot of the talking for you, right? Once you get people to play the game, it's just that we're still in this infancy phase. As much as people want to say that Flesh and Blood is in like a huge growth phase, it's still to a degree in an infancy phase, and that probably you reframe that by how this game ends up being successful, like how big this game gets. But if you think this game is going to be ultra successful and challenge the big three of TCGs long term, then you'd say it's still in somewhere between an infancy and growth phase, right? So I would say I agree, and I think I think the professional level looks pretty, or the competitive level looks pretty taken care of in terms of growing that for next year. There's, Alex just have to get it right, but the groundwork is there. The announcements are there. Also, can't lose an eye on casual.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I answered the question in sort of the competitive context, which is congruent with what this podcast is. But this game will live and die off its casual base.
100%.
So it's so important. It's way more important than anything we're looking at professionally. The professional stuff looks amazing for next year, but yeah, I really hope that they actually kind of do more for the casual player base, because I feel like Ultimate Pit Fight just really isn't fleshed out and isn't supported. And obviously we have a small card pool at the moment. I guess Blitz is also kind of a thing for that, but yeah, I mean, if you look at something like Magic and how far its casual player base has taken it, you can see it's really important.
Yeah, I was actually going to add that on then. It's so important. I think UPF is not the way forward for casual play, unfortunately. I mean, the format just hasn't taken off. People just don't like it. There's people who like that format and love that format, right? The one thing with Magic is a lot of the casual formats that are now prevalent came about from community, like created by community, right? So Highlander, EDH, CDH, whatever it is, the Canadian Highlander.
Yep.
All these formats, for the most part, came about from the community. So I think we're starting to see that a bit. I know we've seen like a Pauper equivalent, like a commoner format, which is great. Like maybe that's a great way for stores and players to play casually. But I think that LSS probably need to throw some stuff behind that in 2022 as well. And maybe that's a revamp of the UPF format as well. Could be on the cards. Next statement, we'll move on a bit. We organized play is too unfocused right now, and I guess there's a bit of like the discourse around this has been like there's a lot of formats, there's fewer events, but of lots of different types. So last year or this year, sorry, we've had blitzcalling, we've had seal, we've had classic constructed.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, the blitzcalling is an outlier, right? That was the launch of the format.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, it's just been sealed and constructed.
Yeah, I would say I disagree. Like, I would strongly disagree on this one. I don't think
strongly disagree, and also wonder if it's like kind of inaccurate, right? Because it's only like 2. So it seems pretty on par with like exactly where we want to be, right? A mix of limited callings and constructed callings, and then these multi-format tournaments in the form of nationals, which probably some people aren't a fan of the multi-format, but it's probably the best way to go, right? The idea is to have the most well-rounded player be the national champion or the world champion. So I've loved it.
Yeah, I think so. You said like it's inaccurate. It depends, right? It depends on where you stand. For some players, it might be that they want to see organized play just one event for a season. So we've just had draft skirmish as well, which we can't forget. So I guess that's one thing to throw into the mix. I think it's good for the game. I think it's good to have the ability for a player who's a limited only player, or a player who only really wants to play blitz, or a player who is really invested in classic constructed, to have events every season to be able to play. So I think it's important that we have this mix of formats in our organized play. I think one thing you could say is that because of the calling season being so tight and narrow, that maybe it feels a bit unfocused. But that's going to change, right? Like, we're going to have Premier level events next year on a larger scale and a wider calendar across more regions. So yeah, I don't think it has been too unfocused, but I could see where that sort of sentiment comes from at the moment.
I'm interested to see if Blitz will kind of come into the high level play more. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe not a calling, right? Like, a calling's pretty heavy, but maybe like a Pro Quest or something like that.
Oh gosh,
and I think it might, to be honest.
I think Pro Quest level, yes. I think calling level, likely, but
maybe, right?
Maybe like 1 in 10, if that. Like, it'll be like legacy GPs and Magic, right? You get 1 a year,
or it'd be something like with I mean, it could be something as if we get like a bunch of young heroes and
with a supplemental.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happened this time, right? Crucible came out, and then there was a blitz calling.
Yeah, that was also the creation of the format, so maybe that's why. Maybe it was just a one-time thing, but yeah, I mean, maybe we could have more formats in the future for competitive events. It seems like it's possible.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, a question on card pool. Card pool asymmetry is the reason Runeblade has remained S tier. I think this is a great question. We probably could have talked about this before when we talked about formats, but I think this question is, well, this statement, I guess this feeling is probably one of the ones that resonates with me. So I'll start. I think I agree on this. The I guess the amount of card pool that Runeblade has at the moment is allowing it to, I guess, push heroes into the most competitive decks, the best decks in the format in any given sort of like format or time within a meta. And that's because you have 3 Runeblade heroes, and you have the largest card pool. I think that's true. I don't think it's a long-term issue. I think we'll see that start to rebalance. I hope. I know Runeblade is like a marquee class for the game, and I get that. You can see that by the amount of like assets they've poured into their art and into the design of it. But at some point, they've got to be really careful, right? If you keep printing these Runeblade cards and they work well together, so you're not segregating those, I guess, the strategies that come out with those, there's too much overlap, then yeah, you're going to have this happen naturally, right? And I think that is a bit of what's happened here. There's other things with like Chain's hero ability, with maybe with Briars or with Plunder Run or whatever you want to get into, but just in general, because I know people will say, well, Briar barely plays any Runeblade cards. Yeah, I get that, but you've also got Viscerai now knocking on the door as well. You've had Chain, and you just have 3 heroes in general. So I do think there's a bit of this. So I would say like I'm gonna agree. It's probably where I sit actually, and I'd be interested. It's interesting to see what happens next with other classes in this game and where LSS go in the next set to support other classes in the game.
It's a funny one, right? Because it's like I probably agree, but the problem with Chain was definitely not the plethora of Runeblade cards. It was his hero ability. And the problem with Briar, I mean, if you think Briar's a problem, Briar doesn't play too many Runeblade cards. So it's funny, right? I mean, it depends, I guess, the prevalence of Viscerai as we head into the rest of this format, which I think it should be very high. But yeah, probably agree. Like it's definitely not a disadvantage. But yeah, currently there is asymmetry, which I think is something that almost certainly they plan to shore up with future expansions, right? Like I would, I'm gonna put it out there now. I bet after Everfest we don't get a Rune Blade in that set. I probably would have made that bet about Tales of Aria, but somehow we got one.
Well, so I think I just want to caveat this as well. When I talk about the card pool, I'm also talking about the equipment and weapons, and I think that's really important because that is what we've had from Tales of Aria, right? So when I talk about card pool, I'm also talking, I am the cards in the game, the equipment and the weapons, weapons, tokens, whatever. But
Spellbound's really good, and Rosetta is like maybe OP.
Yeah, so like you just have these. I mean, you now have the most weapons in the game, and Runeblade as a class. The equipment is there as well. Like it's all these things, right? So I do think it is somewhat card pool related, but not exclusively. I just want to point that out. Like I agree with Brennan, it's not exclusively. Next, this is one I think is pretty straightforward and a quick one, but ties into what we talked about before. Next year's tournament structure and success will go a long way towards determining whether Flesh and Blood will succeed.
Yeah, I mean that's what it's always been, right? Like that's what people have said about everything. Like every milestone that we've hit, every single one has been like, yeah, well, if we hit this, then we will be succeeding. If we fill the Calling Vegas, we'll be succeeding. If we have like a successful OP in 2021 when all of us know the games are doing it, we'll be succeeding. So the answer is yes, but also we've kind of been doing that, and I think that we have hit the proof of concept. It just depends where your definition is, where your line is, like how big does it have to be? But I think that the game is already succeeding, and I think that it's doing very well.
Yeah. To be fair, though, I think you pushed the Vegas narrative because I think on like 6 or 7 podcasts in a row, you kept referring to Vegas as the proof of concept and proving that the game could succeed. So I think that was a Brendan. There's a Brendanism, I think maybe.
Yeah, maybe, but I heard a lot of people say that. To be fair,
I agree. It definitely was. It was definitely a milestone. But I think there's a few of these, right, where you go through in the period and go, you need to hit X, Y, Z to move through into the next phase of growth and success. Succeeding. And LSS is setting that up to happen. With like the way sets are being released, the cards available, the events happening. So there's probably certain points where it's like this cannot fail here because otherwise that's too detrimental to I guess the future. But some of them are going to be less relevant, right? For instance, like I think had the Calling Orlando had a really poor turnout, I don't think that would have been detrimental to next year's sort of plans, for instance. But that's kind of whatever. I would say that I strongly. Well, yeah, I strongly agree. Actually, I think because of the way
I agree too. Right? If it freaking bombs, it's not good.
Yeah,
I gotta definitely agree. It's important,
especially because Flesh and Blood is framed as a game that has a strong competitive element to it, right? Like this is one of the framings of it's for players, it's for people who want to be competitive as well as players who just want to play the game. But it's definitely been a framing device, especially post maybe the regression of the Magic Pro circuit.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, we've got a couple of final ones. I think they kind of tie into some of the statements or the sentiments we've already talked about, but maybe there's some extensions. We need reprints of key staples now. CNC, Skullcap, Art of War, E-Strike.
Sure. Yep. Totally. And it's hard for me to be an ambassador of this because, I own the cards and I'm lucky to have done that, fortunate. But for sure, like I'm down. I would love those cards to be cheaper for everybody because they are staples and they are heavily played. So I'm all for it. So strongly agree. Although it is, I don't feel the problem myself. I can imagine how annoying it is for anybody who's not able to obtain those cards at a reasonable price.
Yep. Yeah, I strongly agree. I think I have a bit of a criteria for this is that it needs to be in supplemental sets for me. I really don't want to see some of these cards in limited, particularly in Line Strike. Personally, but I mean, yeah, I'm definitely massively in favor of seeing reprints of these cards. I think there's, especially with the OOP, the out of print announcements, right? Like I think this is really important for the game. I want to see these staples be affordable. I don't want to have this $1,000 barrier to entry or supposed barrier to entry. Although I disagree with that. But I think we need to see the staples are the ones that there's not enough of. And as you reprint these in sets where there's already incentive to open the product, that's fantastic. When people are opening, say, Arcane Rising just for CNCs and Skullcaps, that becomes a bit of a that's a real lottery, right? Because either you open a a $30 box or you open a $200 box, and it's like that's not really where you want your game to be. So reprinting these in sets where there's incentive to open because of other reasons, I think is fantastic. Like Crucible of War. Okay, well, I'm looking for Spoils of War. I'm looking for Courage of Bladehold. I'm looking for like XYZ. Like there's a range of cards here that I'm looking for, and I think that's a good way to do it as in supplemental sets. So yeah, strongly agree.
Totally agree.
Cool. There's a bit of agreement in the house. We need a better way to avoid draws when going to time.
I see.
This one always comes up, and I think it ebbs and flows, right? And it comes up during competitive seasons and then goes away for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we had this conversation with Steven, funny enough, on
I know.
because Steven took a really rough draw in one of his matches that was very unnecessary. But as someone who played the game before that system was implemented, and there was 5 turns, and this is sometimes a little bit political around the concessions, I think that this system is better. And I know it's kind of a funny answer because it's not really attacking the question. Do we need to change the draw system? I don't know. I think that I'm currently erring on the side that I think it's okay for the impetus to be on the player to play the match in a reasonable amount of time, make sure their opponent does it as well, and the only way that you can acquire win in Flesh and Blood is by playing the game. That being said, there are very, very feels bad draw situations. I understand that. I've been there. But I don't know if an alternative will actually provide us with a better game.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I strongly disagree. This is probably one of the ones that I strongly disagree on. I think I agree with what Brendan just said. The I guess what we had before with the 5 turns and people sitting there for a minute of that turn negotiating who should concede based on the fact that they can win this game was horrendous, to be honest. And I think that the changes that have been made and the changes we currently have, or the way that the draw system works, or I guess I keep saying draw, it's a double loss, right? Effectively, the way that the end of match procedure happens is really in line with LSS's vision and James White's vision for how games of competitive cardboard should be played, which is there's a winner and you play to win the game. So we don't have intentional draws, etc., draws with nothing. So I'm fine with it. I think it's the responsibility of the players, like you say, to play in a timely manner. And at competitive events, I think you might take a hard lesson once on that happening. But in general, from what I've seen, and this becomes now a little bit anecdotal, is that players respond well to understanding the limitations of time and playing within it. And yeah, you might get 1 game in 20 that head towards a draw where this happens, 1 game in 10, whatever it is, that head towards a draw where this happens. But yeah, it's so minimal, and it's you can't have it all, right? You're gonna always have some feels bads.
For me, it's 1 in 100, if that.
So I'm saying games that are a draw, games that end up in a draw.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's
sure.
That hasn't happened to me in almost a year or something. It's been forever.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. What I'm saying is games that do end in a draw, 1 in 10 could be a feel bad, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I get it.
Steven's example.
I was gonna say, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I totally agree with that. But yeah, for games that are going to draws, because I know people really don't like that as well. And we talked about the impetus being on the player to speed up their time as well as their opponent's time. Yeah, I just as Flesh and Blood has evolved as a game. Obviously, I've evolved as a player, but the game itself has evolved as well. And the general player base is much more comfortable with the cards, better at the game. And I rarely run into draws. Rarely.
Yep. Yeah, and
it sometimes happened back in the old days.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I've played Guardian Mirrors that have gone to almost time, but also I think I was playing kind of slow. But anyway, regardless, I think this is a question that we're probably going to get a lot of, I guess, re-questioning on, or people are going to want to know, how can we avoid this? What is, if it's not the system, then how can players manage it better, etc. And to be honest, I think we've really opened ourselves up in this episode to some of these questions about some of the things we've said. We could have sat here for 4 or 5 hours, right, Brendan, and discussed these. So we haven't said everything about the sort of statements or the sentiments or the general feelings that are currently happening within the Flesh and Blood community, because we wanted to keep it reasonably top line, and we did dive into some stuff, but this isn't our full feelings on these in terms of, there's a lot of nuances. Like you said, we could do a whole podcast on just how good the financial side of the game is and that barrier to entry, let alone just one question for 5 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. There's a massive amount of nuance. Yeah, I mean, and that's just how it goes, right? Like with a lot of these questions, like the like our role here and to be entertaining is to kind of take a side, right, and give an opinion. But sometimes there's just so much to it, right, where both sides probably have very reasonable arguments, and that's just how it goes.
Yeah, most of these aren't black and white. A lot of these things we've just talked about are very, very grey. So, in saying that, that kind of wraps it up. But if you want to drop a question in the YouTubes and the YouTube comments below, if you're on watching this on YouTube, or if you're on Twitter and want to flick us a question about these, then please do. We're happy to discuss some of these. I know some of these might require some follow ups, or there might be some interesting things that come out of it. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you. But other than that, I'll hand it over to you, Brendan.
Yep, just want to shout out the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. That is Arsenal Space Pass on YouTube, and we do have tons of content in there, including gameplay, deck text, this podcast, as well as the Time of the Round podcast. So check it out if that's something you're interested in. Me and Hayden are both on Twitter. I'm located at Brendan APG. Hayden is located at Fyendale. That is FYEN_Dale. And if you do like our content and you have enjoyed that stuff on YouTube, remember to give us a sub, a like, and if you comment on the video, it actually helps us a ton. Love to get that engagement. And then finally, shout out to the patrons. Big thank you. And just to remind everyone that the Arsenal Pass Patreon does have extra content. That's extra podcasts, a live session, as well as those sideboard guides and deep dives on all the deck decks that are on the YouTube channel. With that, that's all for this episode, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah.